Get ready to discover the best way to create a thriving business online from other creators and entrepreneurs just like you, who are making a full-time living doing what they love. I'm Kabrina Ashley, and as a former Disney trainer and consultant, I'm here to guide you in telling the right stories so you can be seen and heard by your ideal clients. Each week, join me in conversations with industry leaders as we unveil the keys to crafting a sustainable business that helps you more than survive, but thrive. This is the first creator podcast to give you clarity, help you position yourself in the market, and harness your influence to scale your community. Welcome to the Top Shelf Creator Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to Top Shelf Creator, and I am here with my very good friend, Mike Brennan, who is the creator of the Daily Creative Habit. And Mike, tell us a little bit more about how you got into this and what made you decide to start doing a Daily Creative Habit.
Yeah. So first off, thanks for having me here. It's lovely also to spend time with you today and just to chat about this stuff. That's kind of a big question, but I will try to be as succinct as I can be. As far as what made me get into doing a daily creative habit, it was really something that I needed to choose for my own health. So a little bit of background. My background is graphic design, and so I've been in the design field in some way, shape, or form since going to art school way back in a year that I won't mention. And I was in the field and going through a bunch of places where I'm like, you know what, I feel like this shouldn't be it. This is like a ceiling that I'm hitting, and I needed to call a timeout basically, and ended up switching some things around in my life and came to this place where I was suffering from depression and wasn't even realizing it because I was high functioning. And some people around me are like, "Hey, I think you're depressed," and that led to a series of life events that ultimately brought me to what I call now a daily creative habit, and that was simply I had spent 10 years of my life where I wasn't really creating anything much. I had switched careers and was doing a bunch of things that were really not aligned with myself and undervalued that part of me that's a creator and that need to show up every day and create. And so that's ultimately what led me to some of the depression. And then I got introduced to this idea of thinking like, okay, I need to get back to this place where I'm doing some creating because it brought me joy at one point in my life. Like I remembered back as a kid, right? I was doing these greeting cards for family members. I was, drawing cartoons or whatever it was that was part of my world. And I was creating art around this and then giving it away to somebody who is important to me. And I remember this exchange. Now, of course, when you're 6 years old or whatever, 8 years old, you don't think about it in these terms. But looking back, I realized there was an exchange that happened where I would create something and I would give it away and I would connect with somebody and I could make their face light up just by giving them something I made or make them feel seen in the moment. And so I remembered thinking to myself, this is something that I need to do more of, right? And so in terms of my daily creating, I was thinking to myself, I've been away for 10 years. I don't even know if I can get back into doing something, let alone every single day. And so I had gotten in touch with this person who turned me on to this book, The Creative License by Danny Gregory. And in this book, Danny talks about a few things that dispelled some myths for me. And one of the things he talked about was creating every day, like a 365-day art making journey, which means you just show up every day and you make a piece of art. It can be whatever you want it to look like. And I thought to myself, I don't know if I can do this, but I feel like I need to because I need it. This isn't about clients. This isn't about a career. This is about me as a person and my mental health. And I decided I was going to just try to see if I could make this work because I was like, what else do I have to lose at this point, right? So I ended up leaning into that and set up some parameters for myself and was off to the races. The first sketch that I did was in a Starbucks. It was an awful Starbucks coffee cup that was very, very poorly executed. I was highly embarrassed by it. It was pen drawing in a sketchbook, but I made a decision that day. I said, this is day one. This is what I can do. This is my capacity at this moment, unfortunately. But at least I showed up. And tomorrow I'm going to show up and write day two at the top of the next page and then just keep going and see what happens. And so that's where a daily creative habit just kind of emerged out of my journeys, because it was really out of necessity, for me to get some mental health and creative health again, honestly, to figure out, can I get back to that place where I'm creating and in love with the process, and not tied up in all the other things that sometimes we get bogged down in. And that led me to just actually completing a full year. And then I said, okay, well, now what? I did the year. Great. I feel good about that. I did some work that I was pretty embarrassed by, but also some work that I was like, oh, yeah, this is pretty good. You got to get through a lot of bad work before you get to the good work. And then I said, okay, well, do I stop? Do I keep going? Like, what do I do? And so I felt like, no, I have to keep going on this. I'm not done with this journey yet. And so I kept leaning in. And this year is actually 10 years that I completed. And I'm still going on every single day, creating some kind of art, a drawing, a painting, something creative. And that process taught me a bunch of things. And I thought to myself, this journey isn't just for me, it's actually for other creative people too, other creators. And I just started to examine what my journey looked like and identify certain principles and things that helped me along the way. And now I have been showing up to try to help other creative people and creators lean into their process, lean into their journey, so that they show up and they get to experience the joy of creating for themselves, but then also put things out into the world that maybe they never would have, maybe they've dreamed of, but for whatever reason, they've been stuck or frustrated, or they've convinced themselves that it's not really important for them to do. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I think it's so important for us to really think about the creative process, especially in the creator economy, because we're
Mm-hmm.
just so focused on getting something out into the world and making money and doing all these things that we miss that there's this specialness of the journey as we're going on it. And you look back and you're like, oh, hey, I made it through that, but I didn't actually know what I was doing in the middle of the process.
Yes, the
So,
messy middle.
exactly. And so for you, what was that realization moment of like, oh, this could actually be what I do versus just something that's on the side or something that I'm doing daily for my mental health?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it was something that was like a rolling realization, right? There wasn't one specific moment that was like an aha moment. It was me taking small chances and me thinking, okay, I don't really know what this looks like, but I know I'm going to show up, and I need to be a little open handed about some things and be okay with that. And because of starting at rock bottom, so to speak, I was okay with going, if something doesn't work, then it doesn't work. Like, there's no pressure on that. And really, it was, in the beginning, I had taken another job someplace, and I was, I had these other responsibilities, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I need to figure out how to do this on my own, right? Because this, at this point, was not something that was career oriented. This was something that was, just me, because I needed this for my own journey, and it was going to impact me holistically, if you will. But I needed to figure out how to steal moments and time in order to make these deposits, these daily deposits in my creative acts. And the more I did that, the more I started to learn, oh, this is what I like to do. This is definitely what I don't want to do. I tried different materials. I gave myself basically a place to play and experiment that was outside the constraints of normal career and work life. And I think it's really important to be able to do that. And no one's going to do that for you. You have to make that time and that space, because when you do that, you give yourself a gift. And that gift is one of self discovery and just a sandbox to play in, so that you can figure out some things without a lot of pressure and impact on finances and all those other things, right? So the more that I did that, the more I leaned in, the more I realized what I love to do, the more it took shape, and it evolved over time. Because certainly in the beginning days, I was not thinking, well, I'm going to be helping other creative people and, make sure that I can encourage them with my own journey. I was still trying to fumble my way through and go, can I do this enough where I feel like I'm gaining confidence and insight for my own journey itself? So, being open handed and again, that play experiment piece was huge.
Yeah, you said two things that I kind of want to pull apart. The first one was at the very beginning when you mentioned that it wasn't one aha moment.
Yeah.
And the second one that we'll come back to is the sandbox and making it fun. But coming to the idea of it's not one aha moment, we focus so much on trying to figure out what that thing is that we miss that there's these little moments in between.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so many things that I've learned from you and that you've inspired me on just over the past year that we've known each other. And having creativity be that like little kids walking through the park and seeing every little tiny thing as it goes by and really getting to dig into that as a person, as somebody who is creative, looking at the world around you in a different place of this is the mundane, but this is also the special moments that we'll look back on and go, oh my gosh, that was the thing that changed my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a sense of, somebody said to me once, I didn't realize that we were living in the good old days when we were living in them. And I think there's something true about that. Is even with our creativity and our journeys as we show up and try to figure this thing out, there's a sense of even the small things are big things. And the small moments are actually the big moments, because when you add them all up together, they're leading someplace. And I think too often we undervalue that. We're looking for that big aha moment. We're looking for that huge breakthrough or that big opportunity, when really so much of it is just consistency. It's showing up day in and day out. And, you mentioned about how I could show up and see some things differently around me. That wasn't always the case, because I can hear almost in some people's minds that they're going like, okay, well, maybe that's just the way that you're wired. I'm not like that. You have certain parameters in your life or certain situations. There was a large portion of my life where that was not the case for me, where I was bogged down in feeling just frustrated, honestly, on a path, and showing up wanting to do great work and willing to do great work, but I wanted somebody else to tell me what to do. I didn't have agency or ownership over my own journey. And so I would be a great worker bee. I'd be like, hey, just point me in a direction and I'll show up. I'll be consistent. I'll work hard. Like, that's what I can do. But you tell me what the parameters are. You tell me what to do. Let me know what the expectations are. And there was a lot of fear there and a lot of things I had to work through and ultimately come to on this own journey of my own, where I'm like, no, actually, I'm the one who has agency over my own life and creative journey. And I can decide the things that I want to do and when I do them and how I do them, and take the chances and take the risks and be more present for myself in that process. And when you start to do that, when you start to prioritize for yourself, you show up differently. And some of that is, yes, looking at things around you differently, noticing things that you would not normally notice, because if you're in that stuck, frustrated kind of complaining or just, really stuck in dark place, sometimes you can't notice those things because you're preoccupied with yourself in trying to get out of something that you feel like you're stuck in. And so when you're able to prioritize for yourself in this process, you free yourself up for a lot of things, to discover and to understand and experience in a new way,
Yeah. And so one of the things that when I'm working with clients that I teach them, especially when it comes to stories, is looking for stories that are in the mundane so that we're always reminding people every time that they see it. So I use the example of a ketchup bottle. And it's funny to see how people are like, oh, well, I've got all these stories around these things that happened to me, but I don't count them as something special. And I can't see how to relate them back. And so it becomes a trained skill. And you kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what was that, not necessarily a moment, but just sets of moments where you're like, oh, hey, I can use this, or hey, look at this one thing that I'm coming into contact with. because you're so good at being able to see things so quickly now that it just seems so natural to you.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a process that happened behind that, and it's not always that way. But
Right.
how did you figure that out for yourself?
Yeah. So there's a couple of parts to that. So one, I think, is self-awareness. And that is something that I think just even from a kid who lived in his head so much, I spent a lot of time with myself, right? I spent a lot of time thinking and creating and living in my head. And so the more time that I did that, the more aware I became of some things about myself. Now, there's the downside of that also, but the positive side of that is at least you get to know how you want to show up more, and you get to hone that self awareness so that it becomes a skill. And when I would look at things and start to put it into practice where I'm actually creating something around how I see something, the reaction of people around me would validate a lot of times. Oh wow, that's really interesting. I would never have seen that, or that's interesting that you that's your take on it. And so that started to make me realize, like, oh, not everybody actually sees things this way. Not everybody thinks about things this way. Like for me, and for a lot of us, right, the thing that we do, it's kind of like, well, that's just what I do. Like it's no big deal. It's just I don't know. We're so close to it that we don't see the value in that experience and what we have to offer and how we see things. And so I think that's really the first part is just identifying that and going like, oh, well, yes, I have a way that I see things. And then understanding how that seeing is connected to our creating, because it's the vision and then it's the vision carried out into execution. And so the more that we can practice that, the better we'll get at that. Right. So it's repetition, it's practice. But then there's also this other part in there, which I know this is going to seem like a complete random thing, but I spent some years in ministry and working full time ministry, and around a lot of people who were creating messages, talks where they would look at the things of everyday life and relate them back to either scripture or some kind of message that would be helpful for somebody. And so spending enough time around those people, realizing that, oh, there's this skill that is looking for the universal in the mundane and in the human experience, right? We can all understand what it's like to have some kind of beverage in front of us, right? Whether it's water, whether it's coffee, tea, whatever it is, we understand what that's like. We understand what it's like when it's a hot day and there's a cold drink and we want to drink that, right? So there are certain things that we all understand at some level, and then it's taking that and going, okay, well, how do I see that now? What is my experience around that? And then thinking like, okay, well, this may be my particulars in this moment, in this story, but there's something underneath this that everyone is going to understand, that everyone's going to relate to. And how do I get to that place so that I'm still talking in terms of the details and how I create this thing? I'm still talking about the details of my own experience, but I'm allowing other people to feel seen and heard through my experience so that they go, yeah, you know what, me too. And I think that again comes with being self-aware enough that those things are around you and in you, and then also showing up and practicing them. Because the more that you practice that, the more you put out there, the more that it's validated, the more that you want to go back and do more of that kind of stuff. So it's being invested in that whole process, at least for me.
Yeah, well, and we're all trying to be this expert, the biggest person in the space. And so we forget that while we're trying to be extraordinary, everybody else is just feeling ordinary. So we separate ourselves too far from them. And then we're like, why isn't our audience understanding? I was there. I understand where they're at and I can help them. And so you start to feel like you're standing on the top of a mountain screaming, I can help you. And nobody's listening because they're like you were saying earlier, you just have that special ability. Maybe you had a leg up in the world. They don't even get to know the whole story and know you authentically. They just assume, oh, well, because you've made it there, then it's something that's not for me. Even though
Right.
you're like, I have the map, I've been there, done that. And so if we can learn how to stand in the ordinary, knowing that you're extraordinary in your thing, but not being ashamed of, I can do this and I can
Mhm.
hold your hand and help you.
Yeah. I think, and that's also why I'm so ready to share my own experiences and hold a redemptive view of a lot of the things that I've been through, especially the things that are like, this went sideways. This was a failure, or this is a part of my life that I would rather not talk about or rather not have anybody know about. But I'm going to lean into that even more so because I think when we're willing to risk vulnerability, there's something that happens that makes a connection with people that wouldn't happen otherwise. And whether it's in a business context or in personal life or what have you, I mean, we're not as segmented as we like to think. And when somebody says something or does something that affects you, it affects you as a person. And then it shows up in multiple areas in your life. It's not just contained to one specific, piece of the pie, if you will. And I really want to, in all the things that I do, make sure that I'm creating things that do that make people feel seen and heard, to lead with vulnerability and say, like, yeah, I don't have it all figured out, but what I've been through, if there's something that can help you, then I want to be able to use that, because then it brings another level of redemption to it. And it almost, I don't want to say sometimes makes it worth it to have gone through some things, because there are some pretty painful things. But it's still at least knowing that it can help somebody else, knowing that it can speak to somebody else. And for me, connection is huge. It can form a stronger connection with somebody. Then I feel like that makes it all the more worth it to talk about.
Well, and I don't know about you, but to me, when those experiences are shared, it almost brings a bittersweetness to it, of making it feel better for yourself too. So it's like, yes, you've been able to help this other person. You've been able to be like, hey, you're not alone, which is so valuable during those moments. But you're also able to be like, oh, hey, one, there was a redemptive property, but I actually feel better having talked about it and been able to be that kind of guide or sage in that process.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's becoming comfortable with that, right? Which I think again is a process, because there's part of that goes, well, you certainly, as you're going through something, you certainly don't want to bleed all over people, right? You don't want to share something that's so in the moment, where you're still processing and healing and trying to figure out what the good is, if there is something that can come out of that, right? You don't want to do that so much in a public space that you're bleeding all over, and also giving some people who maybe don't have the best intentions access to that part of you. You have to be smart about things. But on the other side of that, I think when you can be a guide for somebody, I mean, let's face it, we've all been in situations where we don't know something. We're encountering a new season of life or a new situation, and we're like, I don't have a frame of context for this. I need to talk to somebody who knows how to do this. And like, earlier in my life, it was first time buying a house. I've never bought a house. Like, how do you do this? I need to surround myself with people who know the process and can speak some wisdom and tell me, hey, here's some pitfalls to watch out for. Or, having kids, same thing. They let me go home with this thing. Like, what the heck, right? Like, what am I going to do? I don't know. I'm learning on the job training, right? There are so many things that we encounter in life where we're just like, we feel ill equipped, and to look to somebody else who's been there is so valuable. So why would we not do the same thing for somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that idea of climbing to the top of Mount Everest. You'd be foolish to go without a guide,
Mm-hmm.
because you're just putting yourself in harm's way for no apparent reason. When all of us have gone through things that we can help each other with, which is one of the reasons that it's so important to me that we come together as creators
Mm-hmm.
versus constantly trying to be like, oh, this is my competition and I can't talk about this and these things. And I'm so afraid that if I put this out into the world, somebody's going to steal it because I haven't done X, Y, and Z of trademarking and copywriting and all these things. So we come up with all these excuses of why we can't put things into the world, get feedback, see the things that we see differently that people are like, oh yeah, like you were talking about, because we're so afraid of failing. But I think it's also, we're also afraid of succeeding because we don't have a frame of reference of failure. Feels not doing anything and failing seems safer than putting stuff out into the world and going, I'm creating something that doesn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of have to do this by myself. And there's guideposts that I can see along the way from people who have done something kind of similar, but being willing to be like, okay, cool. This is exciting because I get to write the map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, again, leaning into that process in such a way that you're open-handed with it, right? Because you're writing the map based on your experiences, and your experiences, some of them may be different from somebody else, right? And so when you're handing something off to somebody else, it most likely is not going to be more like, Google Maps or something where it's make this left, turn here, stop at that stop sign, go past that landmark. It's not going to be that specific to somebody else because their context may be different. But there are certainly things more like a compass where you can say, we're heading in this direction and this is the trail we take. And as you go in that direction, there may be a couple of different paths that you get to choose from. And it's okay to explore some of those paths. It's okay to figure out which path you need to contextualize for your own situation. And so many times I think when we're in that process of looking for input and direction, we want the step-by-step. I don't want to think about it. I just want somebody to come and overlay their thing on top of my thing and tell me the, 7 keys to success. And so I can, experience success and rake in all the money and kick back and feel good about myself. Right. That just doesn't work. And I think so many times, I don't know if it's probably been your experience. It's been certainly mine, where I've gone to people who have said, yes, I have a map. Yes, I have the 7 keys for X, Y, and Z. And I try to apply what they are telling me, and yet inevitably there's a breakdown someplace. And earlier on, I used to get frustrated in that because I'm like, look, I'm spending this time, I'm spending this money, and I'm aligning myself with somebody who is this person who's going to be my guide. And yet at the end of the day, something's not working, something's not clicking, and I don't exactly know what that is, but I'm repeating this process enough to know that something's misaligned here. And then finally it was understanding like, oh, okay, yes, because I do need to contextualize this to my own scenario. And I do need to realize that there is no magic bullet, that there is nothing and nobody else is going to come into my own journey here and tell me, here's the steps, exactly what you need to do. Nobody's going to make decisions for me. I still need to show up and try things and then adjust and pivot and be in the process every day,
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things that I have had those experiences where you're like, this is the only way. And if you absolutely listen to this exact 3-step process, then you will be successful. And so many of us in this space have felt, well, I did the 3-step process and it didn't work. So maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the common factor of why these things keep failing. And that's why I really like the idea of the guideposts, because like you said, everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different, but knowing as a human, here's what my intuition is saying. Here's what I know has worked in the past. Here's the research that I've done myself to see the different ways that people have gotten there. And saying, okay, I get to choose these every single day. Very similar to like when we have our brainstorming sessions and we riff off of each other and we just kind of go down these rabbit holes and we're like, oh man, that was really good. But we would have never gotten there had we just followed the exact steps of so-and-so, because we would have been put into something that's known as groupthink, where we're all just thinking the same thing because that's what the next person is thinking. And then no innovation actually ever happens.
Yes. It's funny because I think so often we reserve our creativity for our product or our the thing that we want to put out into the world, but we don't actually apply our creativity to the process of how we show up in making that thing, right? And in the journey, we would much rather play to what the norm is, and again look for somebody else to make some decisions for us, I think, and tell us exactly what to do. And that is not creative at all, right? It's and maybe some of that is because, we get tired, right? And we want to focus our creativity. But I think so many times, if we could get out of just saving our creativity for the product and apply it to our process, we would find that we would discover so many more wonderful things that are attuned to who we are and how we need to show up. Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think as far as the creative process, like you said, we're reserving it for that product or the service or the end result, thinking that it's finite, not realizing that the more that we utilize it, the better and more exciting that it gets, making the end product even better, but making this journey that we're all on part of the importance of it, because the journey is the end result. Like when we look back, and that's why when you're like, oh, this is the good old days, we're always idealizing the past instead of living in the present and then looking back and going, oh, well, wasn't that nice? But we weren't enjoying that, wasn't that nice moment in that
Exactly.
moment. So we're like, oh, well, I wish I could go back to it. It's like, well, then just enjoy now.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to tell stories of the past and to learn from that and to be excited for the future. But there's something to be said for, I am in my body. I can feel myself breathing. Like I am here. And it's something that I get very emotional about. Just because it's something that we take for granted.
Yeah.
And then most of the time people don't even realize that the moment's there until something big happens.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh my God, I almost lost it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, there was a large portion of my life where there was a low grade frustration that was in operation. So much so that it became something I was blind to because it was part of the operating system. And that frustration was fed by either getting stuck in the past and thinking nostalgically about it and forgetting about all the pitfalls of and the trials that were there, and just celebrating this idealized version of something that I wish I could go back to or recapture in some way. Or the opposite of that, and going into the future and thinking to myself, well, I want to see this happen. I'm going to get so fixated on these specific results and outcomes, or there's so much more to do and be and discover, and trying to project so much into the future where there's gaps of how to get there. And that becomes frustrating too. And so, we've talked about this, even personally, but just the idea of attachments, right? Attached to the past too much, where you're trying to relive that, recapture it, and attach too much to the future of specific things that you want to see happen, that if they don't happen, it's devastating. Or you feel that you become too fixated on specifics of something and you're not open-handed enough. And then you're not looking for opportunity that may show up in a different form. Things are around you all the time and you may miss them because you're too fixated on one specific thing, one specific outcome. And so for me, this year specifically has been a process of trying to let go of that stuff and be aware of that stuff every single day and go, okay, well, if it's not the past, it's not the future, then it's today. Like you said, it's living in the moment of today, going, this morning I got up and I said, there are certain things that I know I need to do according to my do list and my calendar. But apart from that, there are going to be conversations that I have today that are going to just happen, that are going to be, moments that I'm going to lean into and say, maybe I need to have this conversation because somebody has something that I need to receive, or maybe there's something I need to give to somebody else. And so I want to go into this day being aware of that these chance encounters might actually be what I really need today. There are certain opportunities that may come. Somebody sends me an email looking for a specific type of work for me to do for them, or an opportunity for me to talk about creativity and help somebody else with their creativity. All these things make up today right now. And so I want to be as open-handed about that as I can be as I lean into this day. And there's a freedom that comes into that I've never experienced until honestly this year. The more that I practice that, and that feeds my creativity as well, because I'm feeling more alive and I'm feeling more free to be aware of what's happening in me and around me, and then utilize that in my creativity.
And the spontaneity of it
Yes.
makes it to where it's scary at first to be spontaneous, but then all of a sudden it becomes your normal.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the best conversations that you and I have been like, hey, I was thinking of you and I just wanted to touch base for a minute. And then we'll go off on a rabbit trail and we're like, oh, hey, this is where we're at. But it also is one of those things that I will be the first one to say that I live and die by my calendar. And it's a blessing and a curse because it makes you very organized and very much more in that corporate mindset of this is how jobs are. And I've found myself having to schedule, like I schedule blocks of time, like what you're talking about, so that I still can have my scheduled personality,
Mm-hmm.
but still have the spontaneity throughout the day of, hey, I don't have anything right now. So if somebody calls me, it's not the end of the world. And learning mindset wise that it's okay to say, okay, I didn't get those 16,000 things on that never ending to do list done, but I got my top 3 important things done that move the needle forward. Because there's so
Mm-hmm.
much busy work that we put ourselves into for no good reason, just to
Yeah.
feel like we're busy.
Yes. Yes. Something I want to touch on. You mentioned about spontaneity, and when I talk to people and they ask me, well, how do I establish a daily creative habit of my own? One of the things that I talk about that's really important is this piece of schedule it, right? Like if we don't put it on the calendar, a time to actually show up and create and know like when we're going to create and where we're going to create and have the tools ready, all that stuff, then we can waste a lot of time, or we simply are going with the flow. And we all know what happens there, right? We drift, and good intentions don't amount to anything. And so sometimes people, especially those who are more of the let's just say free creative people, who embrace spontaneity, they're like, schedule it, that sounds like the most uncreative thing ever, like why would you tell me to schedule it? And I say, well, listen, I get you, believe me, I got you, boo, I got you, right? I understand, because I love improv, I love spontaneity. But if you put something on the calendar, it doesn't mean that you've killed your spontaneity. It just simply means you've given yourself a place in your spontaneity to show up at a specific time and place. And once you're within that container, then you can practice your spontaneity. Then you can practice your improv. It's preparing for your spontaneity. It's preparing for your improv. And so that's what actually I think ends up yielding better results and more consistent results, as opposed to these fits and spurts of passion and flirting with our creativity that I say, we go, oh, this is amazing, oh, hey, how you doing, right? And we enter into this period where we're creating, we're feeling good about it, but then life happens and schedules get busy, and then before we know it, like a month has gone by and we're like, oh, I haven't touched that idea, oh, I haven't shown up in that way to be creative in a while, and now I have to go through the process of starting over again to get in the right headspace and get the setting right and get the tools right and get all that stuff right. Like when I used to do that with my art stuff, it was blowing the dust off of my off of my art tools, and then opening the thing up and then going like, okay, now I have this blank canvas, this blank page, now I need an idea, and like all this stuff. And I spent so much time wasted in the moment that I had set aside to actually create, because I was preparing to create in that time that I had set aside to actually create. And so then panic sets in and you're like, well, now I don't have the time that I thought I have. Now I only have, 20 minutes left to this block that I thought I had this whole big time. And it becomes something that is not fruitful at all, and is a bad experience, honestly. And why would we want to repeat a bad experience, right? We don't.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we do ourselves a disservice when we interact with our creativity in that way. And spontaneity and scheduling, I think, go hand in hand, honestly.
Well, it's giving yourself the container to make it happen. It's
Exactly.
just like when we talk about video on here, it's you leave the stuff set up so that you don't have to set it up every single time. Because if you have to do that, you're wasting so much time, you're wasting so much energy. And then by the time you actually sit down to record, you're like, oh my God, I'm just going to do it tomorrow. Like, I'm done. I don't want to handle this anymore. And it's that idea of if you wanted to build a theme park, you wouldn't go, here's a Ferris wheel here, and here's this other ride over here, and over here. And that nothing is in the same space because then people are like, well, this is not a theme park. This is just a bunch of random rides all over the place. There isn't a container that has it. And even when you go to improv class, it's in a certain space at a certain time, and you're able to pull that spontaneity at that moment. And this goes really nicely into what you say about the muse, which I'd love for you to talk about a little.
Yeah, I think too often we idealize the muse, right? I mean, we all know what that word is. As soon as we say that, everybody knows. And the more that you depend on the muse coming to visit you, the more in danger you are to actually not showing up and creating anything, and never getting to that deeper level in your creations, simply because the muse is finicky, right? And the muse says, yeah, keep it loose, keep it just when I come and visit, then we'll sit down, then we'll create, then it'll be amazing. But you know yourself, that doesn't really happen as often as we need it to happen or as we would like it to happen. And so if we lean too heavily on inspiration, if we lean too heavily on, I will act once I feel inspired, then we don't act nearly enough. We don't get the momentum, and change happens with momentum, right? So the more that we do something, the more that we can flex our creative muscles, the stronger we'll get, the better we'll get, the quicker we'll be able to get into that process. And it's consistency. And so all those things don't get unlocked if you simply just wait for the muse. And what I like to say is instead look for moments where you're recording inspiration as it happens. Like set yourself up a system, whether it's putting stuff in your notes on your phone. I do that all the time, or in places like Google Docs or Evernote or whatever your system is, whatever works for you. That's great. Figure out what you can then go back and mine in the moments where you need something because you've captured it more organically, but you still captured it, right? You didn't let that idea just slip in and go away. And then you're like, I know I had this thought about something and now I don't really know. You know, did I write it on a Post-it that's like on the back of a sandwich someplace? Or like, I don't understand, right? That would be me, by the way. But, or maybe I wrote it on the sandwich. I don't really know, but I think it's valuing inspiration and understanding that we need to capture that, but do it in such a way that we can harness it in the moments where we need it, and not letting inspiration or the muse lead the way, but going, no, actually, I'm going to be the one who is in charge of this, and I'm going to partner with the muse where it's appropriate, and capture those moments of inspiration, so that when I do sit down and actually have that scheduled, I can then access that stuff that I've previously said, oh, this is an interesting idea. This is something that really inspires me. This is something that will get me going and thinking about what is possible. And that gets you excited about the creation process, So don't wait for the muse. The muse is a terrible, terrible business partner.
And then it allows you to batch your work because you have everything all in one place. And I don't know about you, but as far as inspiration, the more that you take down that inspiration and write it or talk it into your phone or however you put it together, you start to find inspiration in other places where you're like, oh, I never thought about it this way. So all of these things that we're talking about, creativity, inspiration, we'll get to the play thing in just a minute because that's the last thing I want to touch on with you. And being able to come back to these things over and over again and build the muscle of doing it. So it's not just waiting for some random moment to happen. And we're making the life that we want instead of looking back and going, well, there was so much more I could have done. Like, I don't know about everybody listening and you, I don't want to look back and have regrets. I don't want to be like, I could have had a bigger business. I could have done these other things. I could have helped more people, when right now is the time to go ahead and do all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you bring up an interesting point about, flexing that muscle of looking for the inspiration, right? Because that is a part of creating also. It's creating a system for yourself and creating the habit of looking, being aware. And I think back to my old advertising days when I was in, the big corporate advertising agency, and earlier on, this is, pre Pinterest and mood boards, and, pre-internet a little bit, not really, but the early days, we'll just say. Otherwise I sound like I'm ancient. Anyway, there was this thing we would have that were called swipe files, right? And perhaps you've heard of this terminology today, and it's used in different contexts, but the idea was simply we would be thumbing through magazines, or we'd be thumbing through whatever, or see something somewhere that someone else has created and go, oh, I really like that typeface. Oh, I really like that color scheme, or I really like this concept somehow. And so we tear it out and we'd stick it in this actual file folder that was the swipe file, and we would tuck it away in the file drawer. And every once in a while we would pull that out to look at it and be inspired by something, or get an idea that we would want to piggyback on. And so this whole idea of like, you can't draw from an empty well, right? So many times we think we need to be able to conjure up great ideas in our creation in the moment. But the truth is we need to be filling that well ahead of time, so that when the moment comes where we need an idea, we've done the work already. And then we can just let that work inspire us to piggyback on what somebody else has created, or what happens if we take these 2-3 different things that are of interest or seem related to a project that we're working on, and we mash them together. Maybe we make something new, right? It's this idea that, there's nothing new under the sun. And so no one's going to come up with this great thing that's completely 100% original. And so taking that pressure off, you realize, yes, I'm going to be inspired by all sorts of things. I love when I get to see movies and there's like a behind the scenes thing, and they talk about some of the design that goes into costumes or characters, and they make reference to things in like, certain societies, or historical figures or time periods. And they're like, yeah, we took this piece from that, and we took this piece from that. And then all of a sudden you're like, look, and you're like, holy cow, oh, that's what went into the design of Darth Vader. Like, whoa, like you just think, oh, that's Darth Vader, right? But there's all these different things that actually went into that design that fed their creativity. And so I think if we learn to do the same thing, we will be much freer in how we approach things, and take the pressure off to think, I have to have the quote original idea that is going to be so insanely great that it's going to put me on the map or make me $1 million or whatever it is, right? Just catalog, record, capture as much inspiration as you can, and then reference it in the process when you're creating.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting that you use the term conjure, because even when we think of somebody with a magic wand, whatever, pick your poison when it comes to whatever magic wands you like, but there's still a spell book. There's still something that they're going back to, that they've memorized, that they know, that they understand. And I think that's where some of my favorite artists in all capacities, music, physical art, all of those things, are people that they have all of those connections. And then all of a sudden it becomes so much more ingrained and deep because of the connections. You don't just want this one-off random thing, because when you're that, even though we desire to be that one-off random thing, the one-off random things are the things that are forgotten. Mm-hmm. They're not the things that stay with us long-term. It's the things that we can connect in a bazillion different ways to our lives, to experiences that we've had, to things that we've learned, that we're like, oh yeah, that was really important to me, but it was important because of the connections, not necessarily the end result that you came up with.
Right. Yeah. There's iterations in the process for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I would love to talk finally about play and mm-hmm. putting that back into business. That's one of my core values. And it's something that I think that we forget so easily in this day-to-day mundane of, I have to do X, Y, and Z. I have to answer these emails. I have to get money in the account so that I can pay my bills, which are all good things to consider. But in that mundane act every single day, we forget how we got here in the first place and why we decided to start our own businesses and why we were like, hey, let's make our lives just a tiny bit harder and do it ourselves, knowing that this is really where our purpose is. So in those moments, how are you finding this play for you?
Yeah, I think we tend to look at play like a luxury as opposed to a necessity. And we do that, we do ourselves a disservice because play is the place where there's freedom, right? There's not client expectations or budgetary constraints to a certain degree, right? There's not this sense of I have this project that I need to solve creatively and all the usual pressures that go along with how we show up, how we make a living, how we create normally. Play is a place where you're a little kid, where you're not thinking about all those other things. You're just simply like, it's about joy. It's about I'm having a good time. Like that's how I'm measuring success right now. Am I enjoying this? Is it bringing me joy? Is it leading me to some place that I can get lost in my imagination? So I think it becomes a luxury in our minds when we think it's not generating any direct income. So therefore, time is money, right? And if it's not making us money, then it can't be that important to prioritize for. Or it seems like I've sacrificed it on the altar of responsibility and practicality, because with everything else going on in my life, with everything else that's in my calendar, I simply don't have time to do this. And maybe every once in a while, I have a hobby that I can go to and do something to kind of blow off steam. But it's usually only when I get so pushed that I feel like if I don't do that, I'm going to have some kind of breakdown. And so I think we need to learn to celebrate play and experimentation more. And not simply because it's something that is, it seems frivolous, but it's something that's important to part of the rhythm of who we are. It gives us a place that's safe. It gives us a place for self discovery, for trying things, breaking things, asking questions, being curious. And if we don't have that place in our lives, that's when things get stagnant. That's when things get frustrating. That's when things go off the rails. And we find that even in our best moments creating, we are stuck in routines and we're stuck in our usual go-tos for solutions because we're not thinking outside of those things. We're not giving ourselves a place to show up and again, ask questions. What happens if I do this completely opposite than I would normally do it? And let me be clear about this too. Like this came out of me working in a job where I was creative all day, and then I come home and I'd go, okay, I want to do things that have my fingerprints all over it. But I feel like I've been creating all day long for everybody else. So I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, I don't have the what I need to be able to show up and do what I need to do. And so it was again this low grade frustration, right? Because it was I'm creating all day long, but I'm feeling like it's not really moving the bar much for me as a creative person. I'm doing work, I'm getting paid, there's this creativity, I'm making a living off of it, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's no place that's mine. And I knew enough to go, okay, well, obviously I'm in whatever setting I'm in. And if it's a corporate setting, then that's not the appropriate place for me to show up and go, hey, here's what I feel. Here's something that I want to express through my work. That's certainly not the right place. And so if that's not the place and you don't have another place, then what happens? It doesn't come out. And that's when people start to experience that sense of, I'm stuck. I'm repeating this thing. It's like Groundhog's Day. Every single day, I'm showing up. I'm using my creativity. It's for everybody else. It's never for me. I go home. I'm tired. I want to create something. I have more ideas, but I can't do anything about it because I don't have a place to do that and show up. Right. And so time and time again, what happens is eventually I've seen people who just end up getting burned out, or leaving altogether and going, this is not for me. I'm just switching careers. I'm jumping ship because this is not working. And so I'm telling people there's another way. There's a way that you still show up for your work. You still do whatever you do creatively for a living that has to deal with clients and, maybe corporate and whatever other projects that are bringing in other people. But you have to have passion projects. You have to have projects that are just yours. And that comes out of a place where you play, because you don't know what your passion is. You don't know what those things are unless you've spent some time figuring some of that stuff out. And you need a place to figure that out. That's the sandbox. That's the place to play. And so that's why I'm so passionate and so adamant about people making sure that they make time for this play and experimentation, the self-discovery, because that is really at the core of who we are and how we need to show up. And that leads us to create things that maybe we would never imagine or nor have the confidence to show up and do today, until we start to show up more consistently for it. And so those are also the things that bleed over to a lot of the other project work and client work that we're trying to solve those problems, right? That creativity that we mine in the play place can bleed over to the other corporate and more livelihood creativity that we do. Again, because we're not so segmented as we think. And so you may actually end up getting an idea in your playtime that, and it sounds funny to say that, playtime, right? Like a kid, but it's true. You may get an idea in that time and then think, oh, what if I took this over to that job right now that I have that I've been trying to figure out, that I've been beating my head against the wall every single day. And I'm like, I can't figure out what to do. I can't figure out how to approach this differently, because you've taken the pressure off in this other environment and you've allowed opportunities to come, solutions to come, because it's not filled with that angst. And so then you can carry it back over to your corporate work or your client work. Or maybe it's something else that you go, this is a side hustle, or this is something that I feel like is just more aligned with who I am as a person that doesn't have an avenue for expression right now. But I need to make time for that because I'm feeling more alive right now, the more that I lean into this. And so we never get to that place if we don't make time for that place. We never understand more about ourselves and what we're truly passionate about and how we need to show up in the world on a deeper level. We never get to that deeper creation that's connected more to who we truly are if we do not set time aside for play, experimentation, self-discovery. It's so, so, so vital. And we need to value it as a necessity, not a luxury.
And you never know what you're going to fall into, which is the beauty of it, because you get all of these opportunities to try different things that you don't have to worry about. Mm-hmm. And I love everything about that. But as far as people connecting with you, because we mentioned a little bit about the Daily Creative Habit, where can people find you?
Yes, where can they find me? Well, hopefully it's not in like a stalkery kind of way, but they can find me on my website, which is mikebrennan.me, M-E. If you're interested, Daily Creative Habit, just to flesh that out a little bit more for you, is not simply just my own experience that has taken place over the past 10 plus years, but it is actually a free Facebook group right now that's private. So people can join and show up to say, hey, I want to leverage my creativity. I want to show up more consistently for my creativity and craft. And that could be any form of creativity. It could be content creators. It could be visual artists, musicians, videographers, anybody who's creating anything, really, just to gather like-minded people for the journey. And then I also have a Daily Creative Habit email newsletter that goes out twice a week right now. And that is filled with some thoughts and inspiration from me in sharing my own experiences, as well as some resources from companies and services that help creative people. And then also I give daily prompts that are creative agnostic, meaning it doesn't matter what your creative expression is. These are prompts designed to help you be thinking creatively. And so you can textualize it to your own creative expression, but it just gets the juices flowing, right? And so every single day, giving you some kind of prompt if you need it to be able to show up in that time that you set aside for yourself. And people can go to dailycreativehabit.com for both of those things, to sign up for the email newsletter or to join the free Facebook group. And again, if you want to see some of my own work for design or illustration, go to mikebrennan.me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Mike, for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. And I'm sure we will have plenty of other things to talk to you about moving forward as well.
Well, I look forward to it. And I greatly, greatly appreciate my time with you today, Kabrina. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Top Shelf Creator Podcast. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok at Top Shelf Creator. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we would love to see you share it with a friend and give us a review wherever you listen to help us reach more creators and entrepreneurs just like you.